Hi, welcome to the March 8th meeting of the CNCF IoT Edge Working Group. We don't have much on the agenda today, but as usual, when that happens, we'll turn this into just an open discussion, birds of a feather, and see what comes about. Sometimes those are the most interesting meetings. There is one thing I added, which is just pointing out that KubeCon Europe is coming up in about a month. The actual date is, let's see, listed there, April 18, and to the 21st. The KubeCon, the Kubernetes on the Edge Day event, that is a co-located event on the first day of that conference, is actually already sold out. It sold out very quickly. In fact, remarkably to me, it sold out before we even finished picking the speakers and agenda. So I have to believe either the topic is really hot or people base their decision on buying a ticket on what those events have been like historically at past KubeCons. But anyway, I'm looking forward to that. But if you haven't already managed to get yourself a ticket to that, it's already sold out, unfortunately. Now, that said, there are some Edge and IoT related sessions going on in the main part of the KubeCon conference. And in addition to that, Kate, who couldn't be here today, has made arrangements to try to get some space for a physical group meeting. In the pre-COVID days at KubeCons, this group has actually had physical meetings where I think sometimes we gathered in a room, sometimes we went out to dinner, sometimes we did both. And it's kind of nice if there is an opportunity at a critical mass for people to get together physically. So I just wanted to bring up the idea that we have an opportunity where there is a room available that we could use on the morning of April 20th. And we can do whatever we want with that space and time. The actual conference doesn't start until about 10, and we could get the room as early as 8. So it doesn't necessarily impinge on your ability to go to regular sessions if we do something in that time slot. So just throwing it out there, I'm not even sure. Maybe we can just have a virtual Zoom show of hands of people who think they might be there for the event, because if nobody's going to be there, it's kind of moot, although I intend to be there and so does Kate. Anybody else? It looks like maybe no, but if things change, why don't you ping us on Slack and we'll try to see what we can do while we're there. Let me just take a quick look and see. Okay, there's one other item that got added to the agenda by Brandon, and that's Edge Native Whitepaper status. Let me make you a co-host, Brandon, in case you wanted to share something. And you're welcome to take over.
All right, thank you, Stephen. This will be fairly brief, but it's been, I think, a couple months since I've been able to make this call. I've had a conflict that did not exist today, so I wanted to check in here with this group. I think Kate has been making some updates on my behalf on the last few calls, and unfortunately, I don't have a ultra definitive answer on the publication and the go forth plan, but I can tell you that we're getting very close. The CNCF marketing team put this in as a developmental item with the creative team, and they did create a PDF of the GitHub version, which I have seen and read through and helped to proof and finalize. I'm waiting on them to create that final document and send it back. They also have agreed to promote this new document in a blog post, which they asked me to write, just a 2-paragraph post introducing the work and the piece. That'll be going live shortly on the CNCF blog, and they'll do a feature as well in their newsletter called KubeCon Weekly. There was an open question whether we should kind of hold off on publishing the paper until KubeCon Europe, but we just decided that it wasn't worth waiting longer, since this has been in motion quite a ways, and in fact it might kind of get lost if it were caught up in all the KubeCon announcements. But they are including it as a bullet item in the press package. And when speaking with press and analysts, if anyone wants to do a briefing, I told them that the authors of the paper would be open to do a briefing virtually, seeing as it would be hard to get everyone in the same place. Unfortunately, myself or Amar will not be at KubeCon Europe this year. So I should know more about that here, hopefully this week or next week by the latest. Sorry for just keeping that dragging on and on. It's taken a while to get through their creative cycles. The other related update I had to the paper was I've been speaking with somebody at Cisco, Frank Brockners, who I've known for many years through his participation in the LF networking project world, and building on a conversation we had in Seattle at one summit last year. He shared the GitHub version of the paper with some colleagues at Cisco, and they have voiced an interest to help evolve the document. And I'm pulling this line from him from an email. We're scheduling a call next week to discuss further. But their initial idea was, now that we have it defined, what the qualities of Edge Native are, his idea would be to perhaps in a next revision or evolution or an add-on, think about what Edge Native means from a developer and architecture perspective. So that's all the information I have with his idea now. I'll know more when I speak with him and his team next week. But I wanted to let you all know that idea has been proposed. He wanted to chat about it with me before bringing it to this group. So if there's any particular questions you want me to ask or to find out going into that conversation, please let me know. Otherwise, I'll hear what they have to say, take some notes, share that back with the group. And I think the next logical step would then be to ask them to join this call in the near future and present their idea for discussion.
I do have one thought, Brandon, on that. And I think this came up while we were putting together this whole Edge Native white paper, that we wanted this to be kind of succinct, meaning like paper usually implies this is like a quick read thing, like maybe 3 pages-ish. And that if we branch off into these things like developer perspectives, architectures, best practices, it's additive. And I'm not saying that this one act would convert it to a book, but that's the direction you're headed towards. And maybe having a series of papers is better than having one that is monolithic and encompasses everything. And that way, the advantage of that is that we could even have specialized groups who have particular interests, like perhaps developing your own code as compared to just taking pre-built containers that you didn't develop and gluing them together are a couple different perspectives, and not everybody has the same interest. So I applaud Cisco being interested, but perhaps we should consider that we call this a white paper series or something, and maybe there's a top layer one that is the overview, and then we have independent efforts to pursue edge and IoT related niches with focuses on specific areas. And I think those are maybe easier to consume and easier to keep updated. There's always a sell-by date on this. And any monolithic paper just gets held down by the slowest thing. Like if we cover 3 topics and one of those topics, we just can't get enough reviews and stuff, and it keeps the next revision of the white paper from going out. It seems like dividing it is sort of a microservice-like thing where it has the advantage of being able to advance in independent little groupings. Thoughts?
I, for one, like the idea, and I agree with the logic there. Definitely seems more streamlined and less dependent on other variables, with the idea of an add-on, and however we want to structure it in terms of a hierarchy or whatever we want to call it, a supplementary separate piece versus a rewrite makes sense to me. But I'd be curious to hear thoughts from anyone else.
I had some thoughts on motivation, so I just wanted to give them here. So Brandon, I'm also on those emails. So in full disclosure, just wanted to let you know that I bumped into Frank at he had given a talk at, I believe it was KubeCon last fall, and he wasn't the one who gave the talk. It was one of his colleagues because he wasn't available. And immediately I saw what Great Bear was, the product that Cisco's working on to deliver and manage edge locations. And I thought it was an incredible synergy with what we're doing in KCP Edge. So I had some informal discussions with him and said, how do we get to work together? And Cisco's policy, of course, is they fail closed. They're not really an open source company. But one area that they did agree that they would be able to work with us in the open was in this working group. And so that's the precipitous or the background motivation behind that set of queries that came to you, Brandon, is unfortunately I was the one who kind of initiated and prodded that. So apologize for not having knowing you earlier and being able to fill you in. But yeah, then to dovetail on the back of what you've suggested in terms of supplementary material, I think it's a fair way to be inclusive as well as without diluting the initial effort. But it would be nice. I would add this one compromise, if there were any, is that if at all possible to revisit the initial index, so to speak, to update it with references to other materials so that it would be useful as an index, and then therefore as a way to connect those documents once they're made available.
Yeah, I agree with that. That we need a topmost reference point that just covers it generally and leads you into points out what else is available and links to them rather than having it be, like I say, monolithic.
Right. That would be my suggestion. So if hope that helps set some context there, Brandon and Steve.
Oh yeah, it does completely. And so yeah, thanks for piping up. Nice to meet you, Andy. And
Nice to meet you too.
I think this is the right group to be having this discussion. I'd still be happy to meet with you and Frank next week offline to flesh out the idea a little bit more. But would you and Frank or others be willing to join this call in 2 weeks to continue the discussion?
Well, I'm a wallflower, so I'm here regularly now.
And the other thing, Brandon, I'd like to throw out there is I'm not that familiar with this Cisco. Did you say it was Great Bear?
Yeah,
Andy?
Great Bear. Yeah.
I'd love to have them present to this group because I'm curious.
Yeah.
We're always open to those, and I think we get better attendance when we can advertise and promote talks on particular topics. The only thing is, if it is entirely closed source by rules of the CNCF, it maybe is not proper subject matter. However, even things that are commercial, if they can be wrapped into, here's a tool that could be used generically with Kubernetes or with whatever, I think that we can find room for it. What we don't want is somebody putting on a slide deck with the order SKUs and the price list.
Yeah.
And
You don't want
contact your salesman here. But if it gets into technology like here's a space, here's a set of common problems, here are some things that you'd want to think about when you're trying to land workloads at Edge. If they could give a talk geared like that, that'd be fine.
Yeah, I'm gonna
Um,
find the presentation for you at KubeCon and furnish it here.
Would it be an appropriate approach to, invite them to give their views on the technology issues, apart from promoting the specific product, just saying, this is the way we think, the way we think about the problem space, what we think is a useful approach to the problem, that kind of thing.
Yeah, that's fine. In fact, if they want to just say that this product exists, I'm okay with that too. It just doesn't, there's a line between pointing out that there are these tools. For the reality is,
Yeah,
even
sure.
with Kubernetes, there's, I don't know, 60 plus commercial distributions. They're out there. Everybody knows it. Saying they exist is fine, but giving a canned pitch that tries to sell this particular one to somebody, that isn't the best use of one of these group meetings. But acknowledgement that, there is a commercial funding behind this. I don't even have trouble with that.
Yeah, and you know what? I don't think you'll get much pushback. I don't think they really want to go into the details of their project, in the closed space, right? Because of the commercial nature of it, right? So I don't think you'll get very much of it in the way of a deep dive, but I agree that shouldn't be used for marketing either. Right?
So anyway, Brandon, if you're talking to them, why don't you throw that out there? Because it sounds like they might want to come, but as long as they're coming, it would actually help as a meet and greet for them to introduce themselves with the background on what their day job is and that kind of thing.
Yeah, sounds good. Well, this is
Andy, by the way, you're welcome to expand on KCP too. I caught the last community meeting on YouTube, and you're even welcome to throw out references to those. It looked like it was sort of at this stage still growing, and kind of my wrap up would be inside poker, where it's kind of the people on it rather than building community, but you got to start somewhere. And I found your meeting interesting as a lurker, not joining live, but somehow, YouTube gives recommendations, and it popped it into something on the list of something I might like. And I watched it, and I did. And watching it, I realized that with regard to KCP, I have a lot to learn. There were buzzwords and things that are definitely things I'm interested in, but I think you have given a little background, and I think you may be slated to give some more at Kubernetes on the Edge Day, but not everybody, will be at a physical event like that. So you're welcome to sign yourself up for a future date, and even cross-pollinate it, since I know you're operating a KCP group. So part of that, you could build awareness that even exists for people who want to first take an approach of seeing what KCP is and whether it's useful to them. And maybe the second step would be, the deeper dive into going to one of its community meetings.
Yeah, we're a sub-project of KCP called KCP Edge.
Mm-hmm.
And so one of a couple of the areas we're working in, right, of course.
Here, let me stop you too. So give the audience a quick summary of, so it isn't acronyms, because I've been there.
Yeah.
Quick recap of what KCP is, and then KCP Edge, if you don't mind.
Yeah, so you can think of KCP, you know what, actually Mike's on the call. So Mike is I call him our brains behind the operation. Mike, would you mind giving an expansion on what you think KCP is, or what we know KCP to be, and where KCP Edge fits in?
Okay, briefly, KCP is a project that is doing several things. I think of it in layers. They generally think of it in layers. It is not yet disentangled, so it is available only as a monolith. But I'm going to call out 4 layers. The lowest, most central layer is about virtualizing, adding an extra layer of virtualization in the Kube API server. This has also been called things like higher level namespaces or super namespaces. So within one API server, it can offer basically a bunch of independent virtual API servers. So each one can have its own set of CRDs, for example. And I specifically call this virtualization rather than isolation because it's not complete isolation. It is just virtualizing some things and giving an extra layer of organization or separation in some matters. Next layer up is a particular user interface to that called works. So they call those virtual the word they use there is logical clusters. They say one server supports multiple logical clusters, but the using cluster there is actually very misleading. It's not a cluster, it's just part of the namespace. The next layer up they call workspaces. It's a user interface to logical clusters. It is a particular way of interfacing to them. Next layer up is API export and binding. You may know Stefan Szymanski also presented a version of this that was separated from KCP at a recent KubeCon. He called it KubeBind. And in KCP, they have a version of it that's integrated with workspaces and logical clusters. And then next layer up and most easily separated is something they call transparent multi-cluster, which is a use of all those other technologies and added to and of course some more technology to enable basically Kubernetes as a service or a multi-user Kubernetes. So the idea is each user, has the illusion that they have their own kube cluster, but in fact the way it actually works is there's a KCP server with workspaces. Each user gets his own workspace in which he puts his objects, API objects. The containers actually run elsewhere. They use so-called back-end clusters or physical clusters or compute clusters, and the transparent multi-cluster mechanism propagates the necessary objects into the compute clusters to actually run the containers while connecting those containers back to the original workspace API service. So they have the view of their source API server. So very briefly, and another interesting thing about it is they've produced a unified binary that includes the API server and the essential controllers from Controller Manager and an etcd server, and it runs with a single server etcd cluster, so it's a single server etcd cluster. So that's a very brief summary.
One question, expansion, if you will. When you say multi-cluster, does this support dispersed clusters? So these could be at different physical locations, or is the angle here that they'd all be?
Well, first I should admit that one of the things that I left out is they do also talk about sharding for geographic locality. So instead of one KCP server total, you can have like one in each region. So that's one level of dispersion, and that's part of an answer to your question. The other part of the answer is these compute clusters, they're distinct from the KCP servers. So they can be distant. What they cannot be is, very successfully or happily, is disconnected for a long time. But really a long time is a configured matter since they use, Kubernetes controllers to connect them. So it's a state-based paradigm. So essentially it can tolerate disconnection, but there's a health checking that is configured with a timeout. So if something is disconnected for longer than that health period, it's considered broken. And the idea here is that there is a compute service provider who provides a collection of compute clusters. The users of this virtual Kubernetes clusters don't know about that. So if a user says, I want to say a deployment object with 3 replicas, it is the TMC's job to put them somewhere. And if some of them, those P clusters appear to be unhealthy, TMC will move the containers, the pods, to other healthy compute clusters. I think there's one other thing I want to say, but I forgot it. So have I answered your question reasonably?
Yeah, you did. You maybe provoked a few others, but I don't want to hijack this and we never wrap it back to, you were just giving the explanation for KCP and we need to bring it back around. So great, thanks.
Oh, I just remember one other thing that the thing I was meant to mention about disconnected operation, right? Because TMC connects the containers back to the original API server. While there's no connectivity, those containers are going to have trouble accessing the API server. So again, depending on how they're doing, what they're doing with it, they may or may not have grief with that. So anyway, yes, let's get back to the larger issues.
So I think if we forgot what they were, we were talking about KCP Edge, and we just got the definition of what KCP is. But
Yeah, so KCP Edge takes it a bit further. We're concerned with placement, so location where we're going to place workloads, and we have the notion of placing workloads at many locations, not just any location. So instead of one to any, you're going one to many, and that's an extension of what TMC does today in KCP. And so for the Edge, we're taking it one step further and going one to many, and then from there we can scope those back with predicates and filters and so forth within the definition of the workload. So that's where we're taking it. We're working on also scalability issues. We want this to be a consistent interface. You can use it across heterogeneous edge locations, so different flavors of those, and we want it to be done at scale. So that's where KCP Edge is really honing in. The demo day that you saw potentially, Steve, on our YouTube channel, or some of the community meetings, we had a demo day where we did some work with Argo CD scalability. So understanding where those bottlenecks are. So we're starting to work with the Argo CD scale SIG that they're spinning up, and some of the folks there. So they've caught some interest. And we also did something on using OpenAI GPT models to manipulate the declaration, a Kubernetes declaration for a workload or deployment, and then changing it to adapt to different heterogeneous locations. So that's pretty cool. And so we realized that when we get to a certain level of scale where we're going with KCP Edge, is that people don't want to do the operations they need to change where workloads will be deposited by hand. So we're looking at other ways to do that through automation. Things like OpenAI came to mind. We have an internal product at IBM that is called Turbonomic that does placement decisions based on metrics and so forth. And we're also working with observability folks for the ability to detect when there's duress, or maybe there's carbon footprint or CVEs that are aware that where we don't want to put workloads. So all those things come into play. So it's kind of taking KCP one step further than where it is today and bringing it into edge location specific concerns.
okay, thanks. Yeah, and that was exactly the community meeting that I was watching, the one you were talking about. And yeah, it was rough edges, as you'd expect, because I think this is early days. I think you'd say right on this, but
no, you're right.
We're
shouting into the ether right now, Steve. As you know, that many of these projects go through that phase, and we're trying to develop a certain level of maturity if we can. I dropped a link in there to our site where our docs are held, and our GitHub is also linked there, as well as our Medium site. So we've done a lot of blogging on this also.
If nobody's got anything, I did have a. Oops, go ahead. Sorry.
No, thanks for your attendance. I appreciate it.
I had a follow up with Mike. Overlaying essentially, I'll call it a control plane, if you will, or a control plane with virtualization features on top of underlying actual implementations of Kubernetes clusters. And is this versatile enough that you could do something as maybe strange, or maybe this isn't strange, as landing this on Kubernetes clusters implemented by different cloud providers? Like, suppose as an end user, I wanted to consume for some strange reason from both Amazon's EKS Kubernetes, Azure's Kubernetes, and let's throw Google in there too to recognize all the big ones, and not to leave anybody out, DigitalOcean and whoever else. Anyway, pick three. Lay this on top, and then what you operate with looks like a virtual Kubernetes to you. You don't know the details or don't really care, and you've managed to get some portable layer that crosses these.
So the at least on my end, the beginning of your question cut out, but I'm going to try to answer it anyway. But I have to admit, I'm not entirely clear on the question or the vision. So in our work, we use the word multi-cluster a lot. And in fact, we use it in two critically different ways. In Edge MC, we have the idea there's a center and then multiple clusters out at the edge. And that's one use of multi-cluster. And those clusters out at the edge, they could be in different clouds. We do talk about multi-cloud. And so one of the problems is if you've got, some workload or collection of workloads you want to spread across clouds, you've obviously got a problem of managing that. So, the multi-cluster problem or multi-cluster management problem is part of the multi-cloud problem. Also in the center, we have this problem of, exactly because we have this vision of in the center, you describe your workload or prescribe your workload. It gets copied and instantiated at all the places where you want it to go, and it actually runs out on the edge clusters. And then status information from the edge is propagated back and summarized back into the center. So in the center, you've got this description, which is basically a desired state and a summary of reported state. These have, these are basically multiple workload descriptions. They have to be held in something. And there are basically two approaches I've seen out in the world. One is to define a container object type, and the other is to use one of these logical clusters, basically a denatured API server of one sort or another, as the container for a workload description. That is also multi-cluster because you, in general, may have a multiplicity of workloads. You may want them to not all go in the same denatured API server. So there's two sorts of multi-cluster. They're very different. They're both involved in our story. As I said, the first one obviously is involved in multi-cloud. The second one, you may have been trying to touch on this, and even if you didn't, I'll bring it up anyway. The question is, can this concept of a fleet of denatured API servers or services, really, the point is, from a client's point of view, it's a service. It doesn't matter whether it's coming from one server or a collection of servers. And that's really the important point here. Can we come up with a client-side abstraction for dealing with one or a few or all of a fleet of API services, and maybe even and allow for different implementations? So in last week's KCP community meeting, you saw a guy actually working on controller runtime, trying to introduce this in the context of controller runtime, an abstraction for a fleet of logical clusters. His first implementation was actually based on kind clusters rather than KCP workspaces. But I think that's, a very interesting question that this begs. I think it should be answered for Kubernetes in general, not just controller runtime. So I'll stop there.
Okay, I think you did answer it, and it sounds like a really cool idea, although sometimes really cool ideas bring along baggage too. So the geek in me says that I'd love to get my hands on and start playing with this kind of thing and push the envelope. But having seen, these layered approaches, like layers of, say, running Kubernetes on top of a hypervisor, on top of physical infrastructure, it looks cool when everything is working 100%, but the downside that has been communicated to me by users are what happens when things go wrong, where something is, quote, slow or doesn't work at all. Do you need somebody who understands every one of these layers in order to troubleshoot and figure out, where the bottleneck is or something? So I don't have the answer, but thanks.
I think,
you answered my question, and you've inspired me to be curious as to, gee, what could I do with this? But then, gee, what are the problems with it as well? And interesting. Thanks.
Yes. In short, I'll just answer. I think, in terms of functionality, we're dealing with stuff that's state-based and resilient. So that actually has kind of a downside in that it tends to hide bugs. You can test stuff and not even notice that a lot of stuff's going wrong. But when you start to look at performance, in my experience, you kind of have to be able to look at all the layers because you can have performance problems at any layer and in interactions between layers. So anyway, that's a whole topic. You know, there's, as far as I'm concerned, there's no free lunch. We are building big piles of stuff of one sort or another. There's always questions of what happens when something, you know, what goes bad when something breaks or slows down. All the answers, you know, all the architectures, you know, that there's issues there. Some are better for dealing with it than others. I think, you know, the more real the separation is, the more resilience you get. But that's you know, nothing's for free. I'll stop there.
Yeah, thankfully, we have tools in the cloud native community for observability and tracing that might be applicable here to give you a chance to put something together to keep something like that that's multi-layer, multiple abstraction layers in a situation where you can at least find your way to the next layer. Anybody else have questions, comments on KCP? Dan, I think you put something in the agenda that says KubeEdge contact. You want to
Yeah,
bring that up?
just a small ask. So I've been asked by the Cube by Example community. They're doing like a live stream shows for the Kubernetes community. I'll be there for the next show talking generally about edge computing and this working group, but they would like to hear somebody from the KubeEdge to also, you know, represent their project. And previously Cindy was here, right? She left. I tried to contact Yin. He was also the manager, but I think he also departed the project. So just wanted to see if anybody within this group have any contacts within KubeEdge community and could point out to anybody.
I have a way you could find somebody, and that is I noticed, I believe there's a KubeEdge talk going on at KubeCon Europe. So you could look at whoever is giving that talk, and that would seem like that would be a good person, right? And then KubeEdge now, I believe, is a CNCF project. And sometimes these groups, even our own, don't necessarily keep their GitHub page fully updated, but there is supposed to be a list of who the organizers are of that group. And that typically includes at least GitHub handles and often emails.
Yeah. So I'll let the Cube by Example organizers to, you know, to source it down. I was thinking to help if I can. So, you know, it was just this, if we can find some personal contact, but I don't think anybody from the project is involved with this working group for a while, right?
Yeah, I haven't kept tabs on it. If you want, I'll step away. I'll get you a name in the next 2 minutes by looking at the KubeCon schedule. But
Perfect.
In the meantime, while I go off and do that, this is still birds of a feather. So anybody else want to throw anything out there, even topics as broad as, hey, just like, you know, I go there and look at YouTube videos on and caught the KCP while I was eating lunch. If anybody else has just found an interesting blog or a video lately, throw it out there.
So regarding KubeEdge, yeah. So I found, I also found Kevin as well, which is on the KubeEdge talk, and Ian is representing. So yeah. So I'm all good on that front. Just haven't been able to contact anybody in person. Thanks.
Okay, yeah, I just threw the link down in the chat to the actual session, and it has those 2 speakers. So
Cheers. Thank you, Steve.
Dan, hello.
Yes.
Hey, somewhere.
So I wasn't clear that you want to reach out to KubeEdge maintainers.
Yeah,
Because
yeah.
I know the guy. Yeah. Yes. Sorry, my audio system
Yeah.
is already working.
Yeah, we can hear you, Samoya.
Yeah, if you can send
Uh,
introductions, that would be great. Thanks.
And I don't know,
Okay,
are
so
these,
maybe we had yeah, so we had some, like a meeting between Sony and like I think that they are from far away. So I know the maintainers, so I can reach out.
and Tomoya, didn't you come to the conclusion that for your use, you were a fan of, was it Super Edge too? And, I don't know if the people asking you, Dion, are firmly attached to KubeEdge, but there certainly are other
Yeah.
edge-centric Kubernetes out there. Almost too
Yeah,
many,
so
maybe, but
Yeah. They were very, very
yeah, too
specific
many.
for some reason. Yeah. Probably because it's most established, I think, but it's not my goal. So.
Mhm.
Yeah, I mean, like
I'll-
I have close contact. I have the close contact with KubeEdge because they are requesting me to be TSC for robotics, KubeEdge
Mhm.
SIG robotics. I think they are bringing the new SIG for robotics. So that's why we are close.
Great. I mean, it's nothing urgent. It's it's not on my plate. I just want to help if I can. Yeah, my task would be to represent this group
Okay, yeah.
as good as possible. So I'll try to talk a little bit about the latest paper and what we're doing in that regard. So.
Okay.
But thanks, Tomoya.
Here, I think hope you'll forgive me, Andy, but Andy, you DM'd me in the chat asking if I had any tips on building community. Do you mind if we just do this out in the open in the meeting? I don't mind.
It's
First of
our
all,
meeting, yeah. Tell me
I'm
what you
not going to
got.
declare myself to be an authority on building community, although I have been a lead or a co-chair of this group, and I do another Kubernetes user group for Kubernetes users running on the VMware hypervisors. And I've been doing that for years. So I've got experience, maybe not perfect success, but some of the tips I'll have, and Dion can back me on this, is, they start slow. They don't change your meeting time. We learned that the hard time because people write down what time and day it is and kind of pick one and stick with it. Although when COVID hit, I think a lot of people started joining remotely and they watched the recordings. And in a way, it's unfortunate because there's some real value to the interactivity of people getting there and actually chatting. And people got used to this idea that there was no sense of urgency to participate live, but it meant that I would contend that all of these regular community meetings with Zoom had big attendance drops when COVID hit, and they haven't come back. And there was a time when I was in some of these meetings that you would have close to 100 people. It's almost too many when it gets to that level, but those days seem to be over. Whether they'll ever come back remains to be seen. I think you get better attendance if you can communicate an agenda up front where people can shop and choose, what's there, and maybe you can promote it a little, and cross-pollinate with different groups, because the only way I became aware that your group even existed was that whatever the YouTube, probably some AI bot or something, tries to discern what you might be interested in. It's wrong more often than it's right, but the caption sounded interesting, so I tried it. And just trying to build up awareness first rather than grade yourself on how many bodies actually show up. And I'm not sure you can even tell how many really showed up because when you're recording your meetings on YouTube, people can voluntarily hit that thumbs up saying they liked it, but I'm not sure how reliable some of these other metrics are, so that you even have any earthly idea of, whether you're some guy giving a speech out in the woods and nobody's there listening. Go on the conference circuit and just get word out there, I think. I think that would be the summary of the advice. Get out there on a consistent schedule, publish your agenda in advance if you can get speakers and things, because people have niche interests, and all you have to do is catch one, and then if they like the thing, they'll come back perhaps.
Yeah.
Anybody else have any?
Oh, yeah.
Any ideas on helping build an open source project related community, good or bad? You're even free to take shots at how this group is operated. I got a thick skin, and everybody has room for improvement.
Yeah, I would just say I think it's a hard job. It's definitely on par with all the technical work is to how to get adoption and how to, get the word out. So I don't know if there are any shortcuts and things like that. Just persistence and do the right thing, do the talking.
Yeah, it's turning into a grind, right? And I can understand that. I think what I've learned so far, if I'm being honest, is consistency is key, right? Whether it be, the URL structure, the capitalization of the terms you use, the summaries, the descriptions, right? And it's also putting in that extra effort, like adding a description to the YouTube video that you posted, right? Take so that the word bots pick up and start to proliferate. Like that's how it got in front of you.
Yeah, I don't honestly know how that works. And like I say, my own reaction is it's wrong more than it's right. Usually I hate the things. Too. And but I'm just pointing out that's how I discovered it even existed. Otherwise, I wouldn't have had any clue. I don't think awareness of that didn't hit through any other channel but that, for me.
That's
anyway.
Interesting. So yeah, I pay a lot of attention to things like word clouds, right? Tags, those types of things, because I know, that's what they're using as metadata, and scraping that kind of thing. And, we've paid a lot of attention, I think, also to the graph. And what I mean by that is, if you look at any of our Medium posts, they're all interconnected with other colleagues or community members that have also written something. So we're making sure that everything's interconnected and is grounded. As far as an agenda is concerned, what is your take on, in our community, we use the agenda that I post for the community meeting in an issue in the GitHub repo, but I see other people using like just a Google Doc, and I think you do use that too for an agenda.
Yeah.
What do you think is the most useful for a community to rally around? Which is the one you've had better success with?
Well, I think unless your community is devs, GitHub is maybe problematic because people aren't used to using it, as opposed, I think the Google Doc is more democratic, especially the fact is that some of the better presenters are not the software engineers who aren't used to public speaking. Sometimes it crosses over into people who maybe wear more of a marketing hat.
Right.
And they're more comfortable with that Google Doc, in my experience.
Got it. Well, so that's great. Yeah.
The Google Doc, however, I'll give you the downside of it, that I've been in some open source projects where there are unfortunately trolls out there on the internet who will deface those. Yeah. So putting it out, edit anywhere, may or may not work out well for you. The nice thing is a Google Doc can be rolled back, but on this group, we do have theoretically some control in that you're supposed to join the Google group, and then you get edit access automatically if you're logged into the same Google account you used to join the group. So maybe putting it out there literally open season for everything is asking for trouble to materialize downstream.
That's good advice. Yeah, we've got a way to do that, and we've used it for our own documents internally. So I think that that's safe to assume that we could probably do something similar. I'm gonna go ahead and that's actually one action I'm gonna take after this meeting is to create an agenda in a Google Doc, because I'm starting to see that more and more to be the status quo. And as you point out, rightly so, I think it's a lower bar of entry for folks that are not specifically dev, and I think that's great
And
advice.
all these tools have a maintenance cost. Like you open GitHub Pages, who's
Right.
going to maintain it? It doesn't do it itself. The Google Doc is sort of easy. You'll notice in ours, it's our agenda notes. We just let it run for theoretically a year and then start a new one, although sometimes we haven't even done that. And we're expected under CNCF rules to give up to steering a recounting of, why should your group exist? How many people are active here? That kind of stuff. You have one place to go where you can get that summary. People can go look if they're curious about your group. It gives them one place where they can see the whole track record. Do I even want to join this? Well, you can look at what's gone on for the past year in one place, and answer that kind of question. Or a lot of Kubernetes groups operate with this, where with a running agenda notes. I think I first saw it in SIG storage. But the other thing that I found it solves really nicely is, I wasn't interested at the time, but about 6 months ago, I remember that some speaker came in and talked about this subject, and all of a sudden now I am curious about it. And I know it was this SIG group. I can go there and just do like a search inside the doc and find my link to what I was looking for. So in a way, this ends up being like my own notepad where, and what you do have to do on these, by the way, is if you're running Zoom meetings, I always ask people to help edit the agenda notes. The volunteers often don't materialize, but you go back after and fill it in. And the Zoom feature that does text to speech and gives you kind of a running thing has errors. You just can't cut and paste it typically, but often that can help you go back 24 hours later and polish up your agenda notes and fill it in. And if you wanted to cut and paste that into your YouTube description, that thing where you hit more, that same technique of if it actually was a Zoom recording, going at that text to speech can kind of give you those things. And in some cases, if you want to go the extra mile and get timestamp readings of where the transitions were, it makes it easier as a maintainer. But unfortunately, this community management role isn't free. I've seen projects die because that wasn't well handled, because the whole goal of going open source is that you want it to go beyond you doing it yourself. I think that's most people's goal. And that community management role for the bigger projects, I don't know, like a harbor, it becomes a full-time job, maybe even a full-time job for more than one person. And
I could see
I
that.
think it's at least a third of a time job for a really decent project that has contributions from multiple orgs. It reaches that point where the community management, it's up to you how you're going to get that funded by somebody, because, people have to eat. So expecting a volunteer to show up and just do it for quote free is
What do you
a
mean,
tough
Steve? I
ask.
can't do this through ChatGPT? That's not a good use of that. No, I'm just.
Well, you figure out how to do that, and you probably could in the long run, and I'll bet you'd be a hero in open source if you did.
Oh my God. So these are all really, really good points. If you don't mind, I'm going to actually look at your agenda and mirror it if it's possible for use in our community. Not everything, but the general template, if that's okay.
Long ago, this got cut and pasted out of SIG storage.
There you go.
It's made a couple things. Maybe theirs has become better. Maybe one of the groups that formed more recently has a better model, but it's a good starting point anyway. And it's a doc, you could change it later.
I appreciate it. I really do.
Okay, we're nearing time. Does anybody else have any other items they want to throw out there to talk about birds of a feather?
Hey, well, thank you for welcoming us with open arms, and looking forward to continuing working together with you all.
And like I say, the agenda isn't just for notes. If you want to speak at a future session, just go put your name in
Okay,
And you're free to have a slot.
great, will do.
Okay, well, thanks everybody for attending. We're at the top of the hour, so we'll see you in a couple weeks. Bye.
Thank you.